It's Bowierama.
Okay. I'm not having it.
We're here to talk about two Bowie records in particular.
Yes, sir.
My favourite Bowie record.
And my favourite Bowie record.
You've gone for Scary Monsters and...
Super Creeps.
Yeah, man. You said you picked this record because it's one that you've been coming back to a lot of late.
Definitely, most recently, it's the one that I find myself coming back to the most.
What's been drawing you back to it?
I think there is a relevance to everything he's saying on it. I think it feels strangely quite current for being something that came out in like 1980. Maybe there's parallels to be had.
In political sense?
Political, cultural. I think even the way that maybe he approached the recording, or like the way he kind of like combined several styles to get his sound. I don't know, it feels like some of the conclusions that he came from like putting krautrock and like, I don't know, post-punk together are the sort of things that you might get when you put, like, post-punks came back in a way that's clashing with like hyper-pop sounds and stuff now, so I don't know.
It doesn't feel like overall, though, it is his most influential album.
Not by a mile.
Yeah.
Like, people
talk about this like it's the last great Bowie record in a sense. That's why it's sort of... It kind of caps off what he was doing in the 70s.
Yeah. I feel like it's maybe a stronger start to the decade than he had when he started the 70s. Like, I think there's he knows what he wants to say at this point, and he knows how to say it. He's had to go through like not being able to, you know, say the right thing in the past, and now he knows exactly what he's aiming for. And I feel like it's quite like a clinical album in that way. Yeah,
well, he speaks about this in that he wanted it to be more commercial because he'd had the Berlin trilogy, which artistically was very renowned and critically, but hadn't done as well in terms of sales. And he wanted to kind of... I think he was very much aware that although artists, will often talk about the fact that, it doesn't matter about sales, they are a certain indicator of relevance in the kind of
especially back then, especially if you're David Bowie.
Yeah.
Being at the height of your powers through the 70s. And I think you have to remember the context that like the Berlin trilogy did not hit home the way it does now for a lot of people listening to it back then. And maybe the singles did, but I don't think necessarily people got the albums as much than like how they do now.
Well, it's because he was a futurist. He was always sort of 10 years ahead. But then that's what's interesting about an album. Scary Monsters not so much, but if we look at the fact that it opened the door for Let's Dance, his most commercial album, that's probably... I like that album. I know you're not as big.
Not as big. I think...
But it feels like an album that's very much of the time.
Oh, totally. Like, very post-disco, like 1980s, everything at 100%. But you can hear that he's been around like club music and discos and stuff even on this record, and that it was influencing him, maybe pushing him a certain way. And I think, having done Young Americans only a couple of years before, a lot of the like soulful black music feeds into the sound of this album and then pushes them further towards Let's Dance, like only a couple of years later.
Even Station to Station more so.
I think so, yeah.
Which is my favourite album. I don't think we've mentioned that yet.
We haven't even covered that.
The other album we're going to be talking about, but with Station to Station, it feels like he was taking Young Americans kind of, I think I've seen it described as fetishizes it before. It takes that sound of like the soulful Americana and recreates it in Bowie's world completely. And then it feels like with Station to Station, he takes the elements of that work best for him and sort of melds them with other influences and what he was interested at the time, like Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream and that sort of thing.
It's weird that it's like a mix between that sound that had come from like Young Americans, and then it's kind of put against the absolute darkness of the like lyrical content and the state of his life at that point.
Yeah, so at this point he's in the middle of suffering from the most severe cocaine addiction. His marriage is sort of starting to disintegrate as well. He'd parted with his management company.
Yep.
It's all sort of, the walls are collapsing in. He's also in LA, living there instead of London, where they talk about this in the sense that when he was in London, he always had people to bring him back to earth. Like he was sort of had a lot of close friends. He had his brother, family, and then he goes to LA and he's all on his own. Yeah. And you can really see that relating into the character of the thin white dude that he
100%.
constructs, where he just goes off the rails with it. And it is sort of his last character as well. Like there's flirtations of it on Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, but for the most part, this is his last sort of definitive creation.
Yeah, maybe he did push it like to an extreme where, I don't know, I feel like he used the characters a lot of the time to be able to say and express things that he wouldn't be able to do as like the icon of the times, you know what I mean?
Massive fascist statements.
Yeah, but that's like terrifying that he fell into that just through like cocaine and isolationism and like.
Well, it created a lot of the controversy surrounding this album. You had the whole thing where I think he had a quote in an interview where he said Hitler was the first great rock star or something. And the Nazi salute outside of is it Waterloo Station in London?
And he said something. I don't know if it was a joke. Like he was saying, like, say what you want about Nazis, but like they got things done, or they were like something stupid like that. But
it's fascinating that that's the mouthpiece for this album, and it's so like seeped in occult imagery, and it's interesting to look at it in the context of the fascist statements as well, and thinking how much of this, something like Golden Years, if you compare that in reference to fascism, it's takes on some new connotations.
Definitely, a lot of the lyrics, once you know the background, like change massively.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
I think that he was using the characters as a way to like express things that he couldn't do as himself, but then I think he was in such a horrible place at that point that he did go too far off the rails and then never could go back to the same way, because he's always like, I remember hearing him talk about Station to Station afterwards and talk about the Thin White Duke, and he would say that he was never like, he didn't feel like he had a friendship with that character anymore. He didn't feel like he knew that person very well.
Also because he doesn't remember any of the creation of that record.
That must be horrible to like go through, like make such an amazing piece of work and then not remember.
Oh, it's also incredible that was what he made when he was that coked out.
Yeah, exactly.
If you look at the opposite, most of cocaine albums tend to be overblown messes. Be Here Now being the example.
Do what you frigging want. If you want to go like that, do it, because it don't mean nothing. If you want to go, do that. If you want to go, hey fuck man, like hey fuck, like you do that. But if you want to just do this, what I'm doing here now, just do it, like, because it's like right. This is an advert for not taking drugs. This is an advert. It's an advert.
The recording process for these two albums is quite interesting because it sort of differs, where Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, he was in the studio, I think it was like 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Very strict, regimented hours. They had the lyrics pinned down completely before they went in, and then it was a case of just working out what was going to surround them, and he brings in like Pete Townsend and Robert Fripp and all these great musicians to bring things together.
I heard that like on Townsend being on it, like he only brought him in for one day to do, it was like he wanted them to do multiple songs, but he only managed to get like one decent thing out of them. And he said that Pete Townsend was in like a horrible mood. So I think
he's always in a horrible mood.
But apparently it was like particularly bad, and they were just like go in the room and record it, and then we'll leave it there.
But then on the antithesis of that, you got Station to Station, where I think the longest it's recorded is they went for 46 hours working on it without sleeping. Going in for like 4-day stretches and just taking so much coke that you don't need to stop.
I would like to hear the alternate takes of like Station to Station and stuff, where it is
just chaos.
Like the first time they go through that song and how long it lasts. Probably about triple the time that it lasts on the record.
But it's still 10 minutes. It's this massive kind of
opener
with the train sounds created. I think they made them through the guitar. They just piled tons of effects onto the guitar to create the sound of a train, you know, coming into the station. I think he always complained about that one, that he wanted to do like a fully dry mix of it, like no reverb on anything.
On that album?
Yeah, and then kind of back down from it in lieu of aiming for something a little bit more commercial. Sort of what we're talking about too with Scary Monsters, and that he wanted that to be a more commercial album. I find it really interesting throughout his career, the sort of, you know, push and pull between trying to create something that's artistically cohesive and relevant, but at the same time he did want to have successful music. And
it's like the striking the balance between it's something that maybe, you know, My Bloody Valentine do well. It's like really beautiful pop songs, but done in like a sort of like shifted way. Like, if you look at the
Pop songs, but they're drowning.
exactly, I think Scary Monsters is basically pop songs, but they're screaming or they're melting. Like,
Well, the guitars, like, so angular. And
everything
like,
is wailing at you. Like, from the moment it starts, you're getting an aggressive tape machine in your ear.
Yeah.
That's
a rough opener. Like, that fucking smacks you about to enter this record.
I mean, it's quite funny that he said that, I'm going for a commercial sound, but then I will also have Japanese poetry to open this record.
Well, was it not his lyrics recited in Japanese?
Yeah, it's like, the first like couple of lines, yeah. I think maybe It's No Game. That was what kept drawing me back to that record. Just the it's not bloated, but it does sound like everything's going, like everything's been turned up
a touch overproduced.
Yeah. It feels like the sound of the 80s when you look back on the 80s before it even happened. Do you know what I mean?
Like Ashes to Ashes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
I think the Human League, prior to him saying this, had sort of declared like analog instruments outdated and sort of redundant, and they were obviously doing drum machines and synthesizers.
Yeah.
And I think Bowie was very much aware of that and influenced by that and wanting to see what he could do. We sort of just discarded the sounds that he'd worked with over the last decade. And this is the other thing, though, that it is, people talk about it as this step forward, but at the same time it does feel very indebted to everything he had done.
Oh, definitely.
And it is almost like him taking that and regurgitating it through the sound of the 80s.
Exactly. A lot of the musicians, you couldn't really discard those people that you're working with at that point. Like, you can't throw away Carlos Alomar on guitar or whatever.
Yeah.
You can't. But I feel like there's even a difference in the way that they play, only like 3 years apart from you know, things they're doing before. Even Lodger, like, it doesn't sound much like Lodger at all. I get.
No.
Nah.
He was also in a very different place, though. Like, he's over in New York now, working with Visconti. Eno isn't in the picture for this one.
Rest in peace, you know. I think that's the best thing to have come from the Berlin trilogy. Slightly off topic, but like the fact that they worked together, like to get Eno, Fripp, and Bowie in one room.
We are the Goon Squad and we're counting
Is that racist?
down. Beep, beep. What?
Goon Squad?
I don't think so, is it?
I read it.
What did you have it? What did you relate it to being racist?
Goon being a colloquial term. For like Goon Squad being like robbing black folk, I think was the paraphrase for it, but I don't know.
I always thought of it being like a 1920s like bank robber type thing with Tommy guns.
Oh,
the
like
Goon
a
Squad.
goon, like a Batman goon.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
I love that line though, in the sense that it's just so strange that this whole album, like we were saying, is full of angular guitars and these crashing sounds, and then you have this like almost 50s doo-woppy type like little line that sneaks in there that's just very camp and feels so out of place but works somehow.
We are the Goon Squad and we're coming to town. Beep, beep. Now, ain't that a line which sticks in the mind?
I think, there's a parallel with that on Station to Station. I think it might be TVC 15. And he's like, transmission, transition, as he's doing a modulation. Like, how do you get away with that? It was one that made me laugh.
That's the cocaine talking.
Oh, definitely. Like, what will I put here? And do another line. Oh, that's funny. I like that one.
He was clean by the time he got around to Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, right?
Completely, yeah. I think the plan was to give himself an album to work on that was like regimented and felt like a job for him as well.
Well, like what we were saying with the 11 to 7.
Exactly. So it'd be certain hours he was working, like the same group of people going home, making sure he was like getting up for it and stuff and working a bit more, giving up the drugs. I think it shows because there's a lot less, like, I don't know, I don't think you could go for a commercial sound if you were blasted all the time.
Nah.
You wouldn't have that like awareness to like...
Well, Be Here Now.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go back to Be Here Now.
But if you want to just do this, what I'm doing here now, just do it like...
What do you make of, coming back to this idea of it recontextualizing what you'd done in the previous decade, what do you make of Ashes to Ashes? In this sort of revisiting of the Major Tom character?
I think maybe that's one of the songs that gives me the impression that I'm right about how he was giving up on the character's idea. He feels like he had taken it too far. Like
He went back and killed Major Tom.
Well, he probably felt like he had to get these people killed off. Like, you need to kill that past in a way to get away from it, because he was no longer like,
You need to
he just
kill the
wanted to be
past and
himself.
build the future.
But that's bloody futurist, that again.
You know.
Always killing the past. Yeah, no, I think he was really trying to distance himself from everything that came before.
What do you make of it? I mean, it basically so it takes that song and it puts a spin on it where the idea is that it was written as a drug song and Major Tom wasn't an astronaut but a junkie, and it's this idea about getting high. Do you think that was something that was floating around his mind even back in the 70s, or is this something that he's just sort of slapping on? And
No, I think originally he would have thought of him as a spaceman, but then like looking back on him, he'd been like, I think again it's a way of using the characters to talk about himself, but maybe he thought like, oh, going to the moon or getting the dreams that I was always aiming for, like it was just, it never meant anything. It was all really quite a joke and I was just on drugs. Like, I don't know, it feels like he's looking back at what he'd done and saying that was all a bit hollow, like as if he's not found what he was looking for in it at all.
Yeah.
But I think that continues right up until like Black Star. Like,
What do you think he's always tearing down his past?
He's always saying like, I never even found what I was looking for here. Yeah, I think he's never happy in that one place, even in the moment, even if as he's like recording and making an album. I just feel like he was never maybe satisfied with it. I don't know, he just always seemed like
he doesn't
wanted
seem like
more.
someone who was completely uncomfortable with his past, though.
I think at that stage he was. I think in
Perhaps, but then if you look at something like Glastonbury 2000, the sort of celebration of everything you've
Yeah,
done
I
and
guess.
re-embracing it.
but almost in the, I don't know, to look at that.
It's also funny that follows 90s Bowie.
Exactly. Like, but it feels like he is almost in a. It feels kind of jokey to look back and be like, look what we'd done in the 70s. And do you remember the days, the golden days? No, I don't know. Maybe it is easy to come to terms when you're like as old as he was then.
He wasn't that old in 2000, though. What we're talking
But
about?
he had lived a life that.
Yeah, he was 50 or something.
I mean, 50 years for David Bowie's like 12 million for the rest of us, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fair, man. It's a miracle that man made it to 67.
Absolutely.
David's dead.
No, he's not.
You can't do that.
What the is that?
Funny you bring up, this is the thing, so we are talking about these films primarily, but it is this opportunity to sort of, it's inevitable that we're going to end up talking about other stuff, or all of his records, because there's so many of them when trying to discuss too. But you mentioned Black Star there, which is really interesting to me, because Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, like we were saying, is regarded as his last great album. I feel like Black Star sort of pushes against that.
What, as his last great album?
I think Black Star is his last great album. Thoughts?
100%. I think it's a masterpiece. The Next Day was very good. I really enjoyed that album. That felt almost like a retrospective to like,
in the same way that, you know, he made Station to Station and then kicked on into the Berlin
Exactly.
trilogy.
Yeah.
The Next Day is what he kicks on from to do Black Star.
exactly. There's such a link between the two of them. I had just really got into him around the time that The Next Day came out. So then I was like ready for Black Star, but I wasn't ready to like
you weren't
understand he was
prepared.
gonna die. I mean, only he.
Did you
could-
think he was after you heard it for the first time, though?
what, talking about death?
Like, you must have thought it. I don't know what I can't remember particularly what the general atmosphere was at the time, but there was sort of rumours floating around about his illness
Yeah,
and
that
stuff
he
like
wasn't
that
that
prior
well.
to, yeah. And then when Black Star comes out, people didn't obviously presume it was going to happen a week later, but I think that does sort of indicate that it's coming sometime soon.
Do you know what? I really was quite naive to it. I think I was only like 14 or 15, so I wasn't thinking that David Bowie was going to die because, you know.
He's immortal.
Exactly.
And the
But
world literally fell apart after he died. That's my theory.
everyone followed him out the door. So, no, but I think I thought it was going to be another massive departure. I just thought he was going to, like, keep going and keep going at that point. It felt like you couldn't stop him.
This is the thing that I do wonder, had he lived a few more years, if he would have had one of these late career resurgences, a la Johnny Cash, where you go on and you make all these
Yeah.
great records in the last few years of your life. Because Black Star really did feel like it opened the door for that to be a strong possibility.
Even like before he died, even in that first week, it was so well received.
You
by
wonder there was
everyone.
another Berlin trilogy.
Like, I mean, the stuff that we didn't hear, there's got to have been. What's the record that's getting put out now that was like scrapped? From,
Oh, I know the one you mean. It was last year it came out, wasn't it? Yeah.
yeah. So
Was it Toy or something? Is it called?
I haven't listened to it, but I'm imagining there's going to be some like gold on that as well that we never heard, or maybe he didn't put out everything else for a reason.
Here's a question for you:
Go on.
Golden Years or Fashion? What comes out on top for you? Because they feel like two songs that are two of the best pop songs on either of those albums, and two that are in the same way we were talking about how Scary Monsters looks back on a lot of what it did in the 70s. Those are two songs that feel very tied together, perhaps.
Yes. See, the more I think about it, I'm not even sure I would take Golden Years as the best song or the best single from Station to
No,
Station.
no, I wouldn't say it is, but I think it's a perfect Bowie pop song.
Yeah. I'm going to say Fashion. It is a bias I've got to this album because it's still my favourite at the minute, but bloody hell, what a...
It's so funny that he put that, like, I don't know, how long is Golden Years? Like 3 minutes or something?
Yeah.
It's a 3-minute pop song surrounded by these gargantuan, like 7
six.
to 10 minute, 10 massive songs. It's amazing how perfectly constructed that album is as well, given how much, we've said it before, about how much cocaine he was backing on, and the fact that you're able to create these, some of the biggest songs he's probably ever made in terms of both scope and what they're trying to talk about.
It's like fairly succinct for having 6 huge songs on it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like only like 38 minutes or something. Like,
Because people talk about it being a transition record, and while it is encompassing quite a few different styles, it's very cohesive. Like, it all makes
definitely.
sense. That's what I find so confusing about his stuff. In the same way we were talking about the Goon Squad line, it doesn't feel out of place despite how silly on the surface it may seem.
I think one of the good things he could do was like be silly, but it comes from his self-awareness. Like he knew what he was doing. He knows that he can be silly because of the sort of position he's held in. Like it's funny to hear David Bowie say a line like that because you're expecting, you know.
He never took himself too seriously.
No, but I mean to have that line on the album where you've got like the future's not for you. There's too many. I don't know. I feel like a lot of that album talks about a disillusion for the youth of the time with the future and like the way the world was turning in the 80s. Free market economics. Everything became hyper itself, almost like everything is expanded by 100 times in every direction. But then he's still in the middle of like talking about like all the strange like habits of the fashion world and making fun of them. And
that song
we
got
are the
used
Goon
so
Squad.
much on like catwalks and stuff like that as well after it came out.
But that's the thing.
That was sort of like, it didn't propel it to being a hit, but it was what sort of kept it churning.
To me, it sounds like a song that's making fun of that culture, which is why I think it's even funny that like they use it.
Yeah, probably
Because it
not
is
as
a fashionable type song. Do you know what I mean? Like the sound is fashionable. I don't know, guys. Just fucking miles ahead of everyone else, isn't he?
Boy, is he.
Did you say boy? Is he?
Smithies, are they booing me?
No, they're saying Boo Earns. Boo Earns.
Are you saying boo or boo earns?
I was saying Boo Earns.
It's spoken a lot as well about the fact that Station to Station, in lieu of what we were saying about how he was very isolated in LA at that time, it's an album of love songs, specifically the kind you write when you have no love in your own life. I think was the way that Bowie described it. How would you compare the perspective he was writing from on Scary Monsters and Super Creeps?
Oh wow! I think that on Station to Station, to me as an album, it feels like a cry for help. At like a really low point in a man's life, it feels like he's gone.
Probably the
insane.
lowest point.
Yeah, maybe the lowest point. And he's looking for everything. He's deeply into drugs to see if that can save him. He's flirting with Christ on it.
Well, yeah, Christ to an extent, but then he also gets into the occult, and he was reading that sort of stuff too.
Exactly. Like, he's taking two sides of that coin to see if like any of the extremes can help him, and he's finding nothing. He feels like he's like trying to fall in love a lot of the time on the album. I don't know, it leaves you with the closer, like Wild as the Wind, where he's
cover,
like,
yeah.
he's the way he sings it feels like you're leaving him at the end of the night, and he's in the mansion by himself, like, please don't leave me. I need love. I need something.
I think he's isolated too, because he made this record right after filming his first film, The Man Who Fell to Earth, and he talked about how he inhabited that character of this alien for, I think, about 6 months over the course of the shooting and the preparation for it. And the Thin White Duke was someone who started to come from that. But I think when you couple playing this character who's completely isolated with so much cocaine,
you're going to end up feeling like an alien in your real life. Yeah.
Even the cover is a still from the film as he's sort of going back into his spaceship.
Do you get the sense that he's trying to escape, like, himself on that album? Do you know what I mean? By going so deeply into love, sex, drugs,
Fascism.
Yeah. Like anything that can sweep you up.
Yeah. He's searching. It's a very searching album.
And do you think he's found it by the Berlin trilogy?
Yeah, well, then there was the thing that he realised that he needed to make a massive change in his life, so he moves to Switzerland for 2 months, and then, well, mostly for tax reasons, in that case. But then he goes on to Berlin, and the fact that he stays there for 2.5 years is sort of emblematic to me of the fact that he found what he was looking for.
And I think that's...
To an extent, though, I mean, artistically, but at the same time, he was still in that marriage. I think they separate at some point during the Berlin trilogy and then get divorced a couple of years
after
later. Yeah.
I think that's the exact difference between the two albums, that he is searching desperately, like scrambling about on station to station, but by Scary Monsters, he knows what he's doing and he knows exactly who he's going after.
That's the thing. It's funny to talk about these two albums because it feels like, or it's perhaps more interesting too, because the real meat of what's going on here is the three albums that sit between them.
Exactly.
Which sort of makes them more intriguing to look at as pieces of work in their own right.
It's just looking at the beginning and the end, innit, of that story. But I think there's a sharpness about, he's not necessarily talking about himself too much on Scary Monsters. It's quite an outward album. It's like, it's things that have been bugging him, or like things he's seen on the news that are like really catching his eye,
and the state of music as well. It's sort of a comment upon that.
Definitely.
Both lyrically sometimes, but mostly sonically.
Yeah, definitely. I think it feels like he's almost making fun of like big hair bands on a lot of the album, because the guitars, like, a lot of the guitars are melodic but then still do like sort of sweep runs and crazy moves that you wouldn't necessarily associate with Bowie, and it just feels like
he's having fun too, though.
Yeah, he is enjoying it a bit. Like, they're definitely,
that is the one thing. Even though Station to Station is my favourite Bowie album, I do think at some points it lacks the more whimsical sort of fun side of Bowie.
It doesn't feel like he's enjoying himself as much.
It's very serious, other than Golden Years. But then lyrically, like, Golden Years is a fun pop song, but then lyrically with what it's doing, it's sort of twisting in a slightly different direction too.
Yeah, I don't even feel like Golden Years is that fun. I feel like he's still fairly dark. Like, yeah, there's not a resolve in that guitar chord like sequence.
It's a bit melancholic in what he's singing about.
Pretty grim, saving her little soul, and that's his little soul.
Boy, is it!
It's always his little soul.
Forever and ever.
Amen.